Jody Wellman, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. I'm just stoked for this conversation today.
Yeah, I'm equally thrilled, maybe even more.
According to your website, I have 2,658 Mondays left. Why is this important news?
I like how, by the way, you just jump right into it. You know, life is too short to dilly-dally around in the meantime. I like your style. So you've got 2,100 and change. We need to know this because if we don't know it, we're just slumbering through life, autopilot. We all know we're going to die. This is not like a news flash for anybody listening. And if it is, well, that's a totally different conversation. But we need to break it down into the kind of the ridiculousness of it all, like weeks left, not just years, because that's the thing that can wake us up and snap us to attention, get us out of autopilot and stop taking life for granted.
hmm It seems like it's easy to slip into that autopilot. We're talking a lot today about You Only Die Once, How to Make It to the End with No Regrets. Phenomenal book. When I punched those numbers in your website, it was like,
Yeah.
holy cow. And what really changed my perspective even more, Jody, was when I thought about how many more family Christmases I have left and large family vacations I have left. The 2,600 number, to me, I'm like, hey, there's four digits there. So it sounds like a lot. To some people,
Yep.
maybe it doesn't. But then when I figure out, holy cow, I probably have, 25 large family Christmases left with my parents and an extended family,
Yeah.
then my perspective really changes for me. So it's a perspective
Yeah.
shift of inspiration, really. So I'm curious, does it ever go the opposite way for people? So for me, being a mental performance coach, we talk a,
Yeah.
a lot about fixed mindset, growth mindset. It's how you
Yeah.
see things. So for
Yeah.
me, I see it as motivation, inspiration. Does anybody punch in those numbers and go, oh my gosh, and get depressed, anxious, etc.?
Yeah, in my opinion, appropriately so. So what happens for most people, you're not used to seeing the math like this. And pardon me, I shortchanged you a minute ago when I thought you were like at 2,100. You got 26 and change. You're in good stead. But for many people, it's new and it does create, I think, a reasonable amount of existential angst. And that is exactly what we need because you know full well that we need there to be just enough discomfort, usually enough to motivate a bit of a change. And so I like to think of it like I don't want to push you over the brink into an existential crisis, but I do want to provide that poke in the ribs that's like, oh, I do not like the sound of this. And what typically happens, just in terms of the mechanism psychologically, is that we go from this feeling of like, oh, don't like the sound of that. And our inclination is to avoid the conversation. So nobody here is allowed to stop listening to this podcast right now. You have to complete it to the end because that's the thing that'll help you override the denial tendency we have. And then you can stop and actually take it in and go, okay, huh. Yeah, that's a crappy number. It's a crappy fact of life that we're totally terminal. But okay, wait, what now? Maybe that helps me feel like I might want to get on with all these dreams that maybe I've been delaying. So it is normal to feel initially angsty and then thoughtful and then hopefully motivational. And that's where I do think that like that's the nature of our job is to have a conversation that takes it there. We don't want to dwell in the land of the cemetery for long. Let's use this to our advantage.
So you were in executive coaching and then you kind of turn the page. Now we're doing full on. I'm teaching people how to live their life to their fullest, live with
Mm.
vitality, etc. I'm
Yeah.
curious, where does this journey start with people who are like, hey, I need some one-on-one coaching here. I feel this. You're talking to me. Where do you start with somebody on a journey like that, Jody?
Yeah. Well, funny you say that because I've actually made a lot of changes in my own life. Like I'm like taking my own medicine about really being conscious of like what lights me up in life, what doesn't, what like what deadens me. And I used to do a lot of one-on-one coaching. You're right. So for the last 10 years after I moved on from the corporate life. And I don't really do one-on-one anymore. And I share that just because it's an example of in life when sometimes we're not aware of the thing that's deadening us. And so number one is like, how do you just stop for a hot sec and become aware? And that's why like in the book, like the pre-mortem is this like deep dive, 989,000 questions about you and how your life's going in order to diagnose like what is sparking me, what is de-energizing me. So, but back to your question, as intended in the book, or when I do a workshop, or when I used to work one-on-one, the beginning is let's count your Mondays. And how does that feel? And can I even just ask you, like, when you did that math initially, what was it like for you to see your number?
Yeah, it was I had no idea what the number was gonna be, so it was just kind of fun to see what it was, and then, it
Mm.
was a first my first, reaction was some motivation. It was like, "Oh,
Mm.
hell yeah, then let's go. Then let's go." And but I
Yeah.
see that's how I see adversity, that's how I see challenges in life where it's like, "Oh, bring it on, let's go."
Right. This is just a bit, this is just another sled to push. I like this. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So for most people, then it's, we don't just then all of a sudden go, great, nice number. Thanks. I'm going to go on with my day. It's then about activating, okay, like, let's look at this like precious life you've been given. And even the most motivated people out there, like your listeners, everybody here, you are bizarrely fabulous. You're actually what's called in psychology positive deviance, that you're on the bell curve of like the good side, not the crap side. You guys are like active, fit, like looking to self-actualize. Like I'm high-fiving you all right now through Zoom and the airwaves. And yet you still want more, right? And so for, even though you might not typify like the average person out there who isn't taking any action on any goals, you still want a little more. And so my job then is to get you thinking about, okay, what if we did the old-fashioned deathbed regret exercise? What if we got you thinking about some of the things that if you were like toast tonight, reclined, heavily medicated, like really quite pleasantly morphined up, and then you're like looking back and you're like, this is the life I've lived, good stuff, but wait a minute, these are the things I didn't do. And like, I'll share with you, the whole reason I got into a lot of this is because my mom died when she was 58 of a heart attack. And all right, that sucks. But the bigger thing that slapped me existentially was that while I was cleaning up her apartment after she died, it became so clear, like her desk drawers were full of all of these dormant dreams. She had all these business plan ideas. She had manuscripts that she had written, kids' books, short stories. She was a drawer. She'd do cartoons, but she didn't do anything with them. And I knew about this along the way. It was always mom. She's like a dreamer, not a doer. But when, oh man, like when this life is taken early and you see it all splayed out, it woke me up because it made me feel, well, first of all, it was quite frankly, like kind of like my inclination is to sometimes lack the confidence to do it. And it made me feel like, oh, no, 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 no. Like, number one, life is obviously super short. It could go at any time. Like we're talking about, you have 2,600 Mondays. I've got 1,812. We all know tomorrow could be our last day, just to bring it all back home. But not only is life short, but the idea of getting to the end on our deathbed and having coulda, shoulda, wouldas dripping out of my coffin or my urn or whatever, that to me is the biggest travesty of all. And that was the thing that motivated me to go, oh, like, I mean, I would swear right now if I could, but like, we got to get on with this. Yeah.
Isn't it funny how some
So really
people
the deathbed regrets is the next thing I get people to do, is like, what would you kick yourself for not doing? And then I call them pre-regrets because the good news is you're not dead yet or dying. You might be heavily medicated, but that's a different story. But like, you can still take action on some of those things that you might be thinking, oh, like I never booked that trip, or I never went and learned how to speak that language, or I never started that podcast. You could still do that. Good news.
Isn't it funny how sometimes in a room full of people, I can imagine when you're giving some seminars and keynotes that there's maybe half of the room per se that they are comfortable talking about death and they kind of
Mm,
enjoy it. Hey, let's use this as motivator. And then there's another half that goes, oh my gosh, do
yeah.
not talk about this. I don't even want to think about you not being here. My wife is one of those people. I don't want to talk. You don't talk about death in front of me kind of a deal. So
Yeah.
walk me through how some people are so different on
Mhm.
comfortability in having this conversation, and some people listening right now in their cars are just like, this is too much.
Clenching the wheel. Yeah, good point out. Well, typically females are generally more accepting of death, which makes your wife a bit of an anomaly, but that's cool. Uh, we come by it naturally. So most people are not um, avidly interested. Like I talk about death excitedly. I will doodle the Grim Reaper all day long. Like I love the idea of using death clearly as this spark plug, but I'm not loving the idea necessarily of like planning my end of life care. I don't get into any of that stuff, but that's like the dying section of this, and then there's grief, which is its whole other wild beast. So most of us, if we're healthy humans, don't love the idea that we are temporary, right? Like it's just a natural reaction. And so there are different levels of death acceptance in research. And so having like a neutral death acceptance is actually the healthiest, which is like, yeah, I don't like that it's coming. I like living. I still want to contribute, but okay, well, fine. I'll get my ducks in a row. I'll be responsible. and I'll use it to my advantage to get on with my dreams. A positive death acceptance might be a bit weird in some instances, like, I can't wait to die. I mean, that would obviously be a problem. And then the negative, though, is where a lot of people will live in this land of denial. But a lot of existential psychologists and other therapists will be very clear and say, like, when we deny death, they say it exacts a price that we miss out on some of the fullness of living, not just because we don't get the benefit of memento mori, which is like it means remember we must die. It's the old Latin phrase. I mean, I look at it like that, like, guys, when you're aware that time is limited, you use it better. So there's that fact. But even just the idea about saying, okay, yeah, I know it's coming and I'm going to plan for it and I'm going to think about it and I'm not going to avoid the conversation. I'm going to start talking about my bucket list, like change it and use it more productively. That helps us live more fully rather than burying down the angst, because then that tends to manifest in other anxieties. Doesn't help us.
Is one of your goals, one of your jobs, to help create a little bit more comfortability with these people that are uncomfortable? Is that kind of one of your goals that you try to do when you're on stage? And if you do, what does that look like per se? Do you have strategies or things that help those folks?
Oh, that's a really good question. I have separated myself a little bit from like, I can try and make it fun and light. And believe me, I've learned that early on. Like, my delivery about the topic of death needs to be non-threatening and irreverent in order for people to actually feel like I will not leave the room. I've had no one leave the room during one of my presentations. Usually giving up prizes helps with that. So that's good news. But I don't believe, it's a good differentiating question, because my job, I don't think, is to help you be okay with death. My job is to help you live more fully. And my tool is to say, oh yeah, your time's ticking, honey. And so we don't dwell too long. Like, I'm not spending time. There are people I know, friends of mine, who are involved in like end of life care and planning, and they've got a big row to hoe. Like, that's a big thing. Getting all of those ducks in a row. I'm not, it's not my playground. So for really, like, I'm going to get you counting your Mondays. I'm going to talk about the idea. I'm going to, cheekily refer to the Grim Reaper a lot, but we're going to flip the script pretty fast to, how are you living? Like the Ben Franklin quote I've always loved, like, most people die at 25, but are buried at 75. That's what we're fixing here. We're just carpe diem life, let's just stuff more life in, and let's spend more energy talking about living than dying. I mean, the dying is just like, that's like a little bit of an amusing, unfortunate backdrop.
Got it. Thanks for the clarification. I love the simplicity of this book. I also love the strategies that come with it. I think it's one thing to listen to a motivational speech or a podcast and have zero strategies with it. That doesn't really help anybody. And so I love this difference between a transformational impact and a transactional impact. I believe you have a transformational impact with this book because there are strategies that go with it. There's one that you've already touched on that's very, very simple. And in the book, it says this: most of us are out of touch with what makes us happy, woefully ignorant about the things that light the flame in our furnaces. It's hard to live fully if we're not cognizant of what makes a fabulous full life ourself. This is not so rocket science, though. It's basic stuff. Yet so many of us underestimate the direct relationship between doing the things that make us happy and actually being happy. This has been a
Yeah.
theme of my podcast lately about being happy. And the
Yeah.
exercise you say is fill in this blank. I feel most alive when blank. I'll say that again. I feel most alive when blank. Listeners, I encourage you to fill out that answer. I did it myself. I feel most alive when blank. Why is that question so important? And why do people skip this simple step?
Yeah. Well, I look at it, it's important because these are the answers to the test of life. Like, if you sit and fill that out, go to Starbucks, go to the bar, I'll meet you at the bar, not Starbucks, and like fill out that answer, that's your, like, well, eureka, like my operating manual for how to back to being happy, right? But we don't go there because we are on this fast-paced treadmill, and we're go, 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 and we're consumed with all the other things, the minutia of life. And it's a rare person, unless you already have a coach, or you're really just super inclined to be self-reflective and you've been journaling for years or whatever. Most of us are actually like that question hilariously stumps people when I ask. And even seemingly less threatening is the question that you would have read in the book. It's like, write out 30 things that just make you happy. simple things. And then the caveat is that they can't be things like, you know, having brunch in New Zealand overlooking the cliffs. Like it's got to be something generally accessible to your life. And a lot of times I get a lot of blank stares like, I don't know what makes me coffee cake? I don't know. And then but once you start writing the list out, and this is why it's good in a group like Teams, because then, you know, Yolanda says, oh, you know, I love finishing a chapter in my book. And then someone's like, oh, and then they kind of, then it's like popcorn, you start getting ideas down. But number one, we're not aware because we don't take the time to stop and do that like inward looking. And then, but once you do, it's a little bit like an avalanche. That's a cool one where you get to go, oh yeah, wait a minute, I have a list of things. These are cool. But then you go, so what? And now is when I go, oh, good for you. Now you have a menu of things you can do when you have like maybe even a 10 or 30-minute interval in your life where you're like, you have choice points every day. You have maybe a window for something that you're going to eat at lunch, or maybe how you start your morning or you're ending your day. Like you know, we're all busy, but we all have little pockets of time because we all find time to go on social media, you know, or whatever. Like I find a lot of time to watch Netflix at night. Clearly I have time, but these are the things where it's like, if I do want to like juice up my life, what if I went to my list and I was like, wait a minute, one of the things I like to do, like I like to browse through bookstores. And weirdly, like that's a good example of how like I don't really do it that often. But it's a good like, well, duh. Like if you happen to have a random Wednesday night and I mean, again, my default will be to be on the couch. I'm not proud of it. I do enjoy it, but I also recognize that it deadens me. And so I could actually make a choice and say, you know what? You know what? I'm gonna go to the bookstore in town. It's a really cute little one. It's like 10-minute drive away. And I could just browse. Maybe I won't even buy anything, but that's going to make me happy. And I'm going to come home and I'll have dinner. And maybe then I go on the couch. But at least that's a choice that you can make. Or to like sit outside and have your coffee in the morning for breakfast. Or like, what's an example for you? Is there something like really cheap and cheerful that you like to do that makes you happy?
Cheap and cheerful. You know what? It's going on a walk. And sometimes, like, my family is like, my wife is like, you're like a dog. You just like to go, like, oh, you want to go on a walk? And, you know, I love going on a walk, especially at the end of the day. I like ending my day with a walk. It's cheap, it's inexpensive, it doesn't take very long. I feel
Yeah.
a more connection with my wife and our
Yeah.
baby girl. So for me, I think it's a simple walk.
Yes. That, by the way, is funny because even hearing you describe it, number one, you and my husband will make great friends because he loves the walk too. You're both golden freaking retrievers. Um, and I will admit that like when you come back, your life is different, right? Like your mind is different. Like talk about mindset advantage. Like your orientation to life is just a wee bit better than it would have been if you just like slid right on into cooking the broccoli. Um, you're tuning in though, like even the way you started to describe it, I've noticed this now, and I want to do more research around it. We tend to feel a little bit like unsure, not unsure, you were sure of your answer, but we kind of do this thing like, I don't even know why this thing makes me happy. Like we try to make sense of it and we don't even have to. Like, I don't care that the woman in the crowd's like, I don't know why, but when I play my ukulele, I'm so happy. I'm like, rock on, play more. Who cares why? Or someone else, you know, when I'm doing Duolingo and I'm learning how to speak Italian, I don't know why it is. It doesn't matter why. Just keep doing more of it. You know, these are again back to the idea about like the answers to the test. Let's just do more of the stuff that we've already proven lift us up. That's all this is, just increments in our lives that we have a choice. If we want to make it even just 5% better, why wouldn't we?
It sounds like a lot of this thus far is a lot of self-awareness. We can't change what we're not aware of. We cannot change what we're not aware of. And so for you in this practice, at least the beginning of this conversation, there's a lot of just getting aware of the fact that yes, you're going to die one day. And then getting aware of, hey, what makes you happy? But then taking it
Yes.
one step further. I heard some research once that information sits 7 times deeper in our brain when we take pen to paper. So instead
Oh,
of just saying it out loud, hey, these are
yeah.
things that make me happy. No, 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 no. You're telling me go write them down. Create a list of
Yes.
30 things and it hits a little bit deeper.
It does. You're so right about research. It is so compelling, and it's a pen to paper is more effective than laptop. But even if you just type it in, I'm better that you do that than nothing at all. But you're nice noticing about awareness. So this friend of mine, Jessica, read the book before it came out, and she is such a dear friend who does this. She did a PowerPoint presentation of her experience of reading the book, and I was like, all right, you just elevated up in my hierarchy of friendship here, babe. So she did this thing and she goes, the thing that struck me, and she's so freaking smart. She goes, the book was about awareness intention, and action. And I was, of
Yes.
course, taking notes on her notes of my book. I was like, that's perfect because you're right. Like, and this is applied to everything that I know that you talk about and you interview about in this amazing podcast, like awareness, like you know, awareness is the precursor to change. Like, well, okay, so what is it? How am I doing right now? And that's why I talk about in this pre-mortem, doing a bit of like a getting an understanding. I call it diagnosing the dead zones. What's flatlined in your life? And then intention is like, okay, in light of all that, regardless, no judgment where you are with all these domains of your life and stuff, like work might be good, but your relationship sucks, or your health might be great, but your social life is whatever. What's your intent? Like, what do you want? And like, let's size this. We can't have it all, not all at the same time. So, what would be a really great thing that would make you feel alive and proud to be living the life you're living and feeling like, okay, I'm avoiding regrets right now. What is your intention? What would you like to do next? And then, of course, action, because all that's just a bunch of like, that's where I get very squeamish, DJ, about bucket lists. I mean, this is the area I love to play in is like, yeah, design your life and like put all your stuff down and record all the things you want to do. But I don't know about you. You see this a lot just like in psychology about people declaring an intention. And then there's this bizarre thing that happens where we feel just enough satisfaction that we wrote it down. And then we close the journal or we close the file. I don't know. I have it on an Excel file, super nerdy, but like, and then it's like, you go on with your life. And so a bucket list is cool if it is time bound. But otherwise, I get a little bit afraid that it's just basically a repository for good intentions that you will die with. So,
Yeah.
little sidebar there.
Yeah, Andrew Huberman talks a lot about there's an actual dopamine hit that we get when we talk about our goals. So when we
Yes.
talk about them and we write them down, there's a dopamine hit, and sometimes that's enough for people to be like, "Oh, I feel satisfied. I feel that craving." There's another man named Harvey Dorfman who passed away, but one of the best mental performance coaches in the sport of baseball, and he
Mhm.
talks about it's kind of a three-step process, just like you. His words there are awareness, strategy, action. So when
Mm,
working with a client or working with a team, do they have
mm,
awareness, give them the strategy, and then follow up on the action, and it's kind
yeah,
of in the same lines there. And so i
love
like
it.
i like the rule of threes, the words of threes here. So if we can stick
Mm,
with one more strategy, so we have the
yeah,
deathbed exercise. If you were to die tonight, what would be the regrets? The second one
yeah.
is finding out, writing down what makes you most alive. What would you say would
Mm,
be a third strategy, Jody, that you like to lean on to help people live their fullest?
hmm. Yeah, another example, just one's just popping up to me. I could pick one out of a grab bag. I'm a fan of this question about like, would you recommend your life? And that net promoter score, they send you a survey after you go to Target, like, would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent would you recommend this to family or friends? And I don't know, you pick a number. I feel like, well, we could do that with our lives. Like look at your life as you've been living it. Let's just pick from 18 and older, because obviously childhood is just a cesspool. But now, like from when you were able to make some choices on your own, would you, if you had to encapsulate, that's the package, boom, would you recommend that someone else get to live every single day the way you did it in every little situation, every high, every low? And now, on one hand, it's a little bit of a downer because it's like, well, all that's water under the bridge, but the energy around this is supposed to be about, oh, like if I even, and let's maybe even just say the last year of your life, if that helps you, because many of us go through metamorphoses. Which is it? Metamorphosi? Should that be a plural of metamorphosis? I don't know. We change, and then we get to like, what about the last year? Are you proud of how you've been living? And if you wouldn't recommend that someone else live that life, because maybe you've been in a bit of a funk, or maybe you've been going through the, autopilot like a highly functioning zombie, I would say, let that be your awareness to say, and to use this example, and I will throw in a bonus thing that we can do strategically. It's like, assess your habits, because a lot of people, and I know you're rightfully like a proponent in many ways about like having healthy habits. Well, for sure, I'm not suggesting we detonate our lives, but I will also offer the perspective that habits can be very deadening, that they are the things that, as some philosophers have said, will dull the edges of our existence, because that's where we glaze over and we just say, like, this is what I do. This is my workout on Tuesday. And then I do chest on Thursday and then whatever. And like, I'm glad you're healthy. I'm glad you're going to the gym, for example, or I'm glad that you are having a healthy breakfast. But what if we switched it up? And so back to that example of like, if you looked at the last year of your life or just your life as a whole, if you wouldn't recommend it, what would be the thing that maybe is a little bit agitating? And like, let's be honest, EJ, like a lot of what we're talking about today is these are some hard truths, looking at ourselves and saying, I'm not really proud of the way I've been living this part of my life. And and I would just encourage us to have like just a giant self hug of self compassion. Cause like, yeah, you're not alone. Like I do this stuff. Like, by the way, I'm not preaching from some sort of a soapbox. Like I've got it all figured out. Like I do this stuff because I need to learn how to live. I need to relearn how to live every day in some capacity because this is what we do. We adapt and we get into to a routine, i.e. a rut. And then we need to go, oh gosh, I got to get back on that thing I was doing that made me feel more alive. So it might be a routine that needs busting. That might be an opportunity for you.
Cool. So deathbed exercise number one is, hey, if you were to die tonight, what would be the regrets? And do we have time? Can we still fix some of those? Number two is just find out really what makes you happy. There's nothing too big or too small here. Let's get a list of 30 things. And then would you recommend your life the last 10 years to somebody else? If not, what are the things that you would change? A lot of this too comes down to if I'm finding patterns here. One of the patterns is self-awareness. Another one is you got to
Mm.
be able to pause. You got to be able to pause to do this stuff, Jody, because what I'm hearing from you is that what we're trying to get away from is autopilot zombie mode, which a lot of
Yeah.
society is. Admittedly, I've been there many times, but what we're
Yeah.
really trying to do is, can you find the time in your life to press pause? And there's
Hmm.
power in the pause, isn't there?
Hmm. Yeah, there is. I just read a little metaphor about, I'm probably going to botch it up, but I'll see how I do this. About the cheetah is a really good metaphor for the cheetah can go like 60 miles an hour. Powerful cat. And yet the magic of this animal while it's hunting is that it knows how to implement a pause in the right moment, in that it will take a quick beat while it's running and it can shift and it will slow down to let like more than half of that slow down to like 30 miles an hour, which is almost inconceivable for most other animals. And that allows it to be agile. And so it is because of this pause that it's able to, well, now the metaphor gets really gross because it hunts and kills and eats it's prey. But anyways, pause. So, but here's where I want to just stop and go. Like I anticipate that feeling of pushback, like, well, I'm so busy.
Yes.
Like, and we are, right? Now, a lot of it is busyness because we have adopted and created some routines that maybe could be busted. I'll just offer that as an idea. But let's just size how long this really does take. So, this pre-mortem, I was talking to an old client last week back in Chicago, and she said, so I'm doing the pre-mortem and I'm taking it slowly because I want to go through the questions. I don't want to just gloss over it. And she said, and some of the questions it make me uncomfortable, but I have to pause. And so I'm pacing myself. And I was like, hallelujah to you. This is it. Like it's not a race. Now, on one hand, I mix my messages. Life's short, get on
Yeah.
with it. But also like, but pace yourself. And if you want to do it justice, if you sense that there's a thing like it could just take one 5 or 10 minute increment at a time. And I know some people like maybe they're still going to the office. They'll drive home, park in their garage, and before going in to the cacophony of all things life, to their kids and to their spouse and to like dinner on the stove and all the things, they just sit in the car for a quick second. And not only do they just kind of prioritize what they want to do for the next day, that's their hot tip for productivity, but they'll just sit and this person's like, I'm going through each little kind of question and exercise. So I stop and I go, okay, like for example, what would be the things that I would want to change? Boom, boom, boom. And they write that out and they think about it, make some notes in the margin, close the book, go in the house, and have a great evening. And there's psychologically, there's something that's very different, your orientation to your experience about being with other people. When you have just come from a moment of self-enhancement, you're showing up better for your family, or if you're going to your workout and you just know that you did something for yourself you made a choice that was about something good for you. These are the things that we like, these are stepstones that will elevate us. And so screeching into the garage, feeling late, behind, and like coming in and like not organized, you're going to be a different person and have a different evening than you would if you maybe just did a little bit of I spent 7 minutes on myself. I'm amazing.
I was talking to my mentor the other day who also considers himself a busy individual like myself, probably like you. And one of the things that was very enlightening that he said was the better I shut down, the
Mm.
more I can push forward. And so we were
Mm,
talking about, hey, like we both love to work and we don't really consider work work because it's just so fun. We could work all night.
mhm,
And yet we
mhm.
have these other family, the other things and other responsibilities in our life. And basically the idea was the better that I can shut down at night. So the better I can really just get rid of work and get the phone in the other room, the better I can shut down, the more productive, the more I can turn on the next day. And some people listening are like, yeah, duh, obviously. But until you do that, it's like, oh, I understand. If the harder, the better I can shut down tonight, the
Yep.
better I'm going to be tomorrow. And so that's kind of what I see for you is the better you can slow down, the more
Yep.
perhaps you can speed up.
You just gave a really great analogy, I think, even just for life overall. Because sometimes we go through the motions because it's the next obvious thing, right? Like coming into the garage and going into the house. It's like we're literally putting one foot in front of the other, and we're letting maybe the our circumstances happen to us. And versus just, yeah, doing that little like, hey, what if I just reflected for a second and what could I do right now in order to make this next increment better? What could I do, if I happen to have a 20-minute moment before my next meeting and it's lunch, and normally my MO would be like I would scarf food while I was checking emails and answering emails because I value productivity. So on one hand, yay me, I got to answer 12 emails. The other option is to make a choice and say, what would actually make me feel more energetic, or insert here what you want to feel. Maybe you want to feel calm. Maybe you want to feel totally enthused. Maybe whatever it is, and inspired or whatnot. It's like you could choose to do something different. You could do a really quick walk around the block. That'd be your choice. And you could do that quickie and then come back and be like, I am liking life better. And the emails will get answered tonight or tomorrow, right? It's like just the priorities.
We talk about regrets. I'm fascinated by
Oh,
this idea of regrets. I don't know
yeah.
why, but I've always been fascinated about what people say at the end of their lives. It's just always
Yeah.
been interesting to me. And I think I like this phrase, Jody, that success leaves clues. And I
Yeah.
don't know, one of the many lessons that my parents taught me, and it wasn't directly, but was that, find somebody that you want to be like, or find somebody that's doing what you're doing and either
Yeah.
copy them or ask them how you got there. I mean, there's so much wisdom. And I think maybe that's one reason why I do this podcast is because I like to
Yeah.
talk to people who are experts in fields because I believe that a 10-minute conversation can save you maybe 10 years of your life
Oh,
if it's pivotal.
I
So
love
if
it.
we're kind of going to use that layer here, talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit about what are people in your research, what are people saying at the end of their lives? What are they
Yeah.
regretting most? Can we have just a conversation about
Oh,
regrets?
oh, I want nothing more than that. I love it so much. I love it so much. It hurts. Let's start with what people are not saying. People on their deathbeds or like later in life as we kind of mellow, they're not fussed about the regrets about the things they did. Like, oh, I should have bought that house in Florida, or damn it, I wish that I hadn't had that affair, or I wish that I hadn't gotten that DUI, or I bullied Joe on the schoolyard. Most of us tend to be able to, those are called regrets of commission, things we did. They don't really phase us that much at the end. And so let's just already like, we're like, okay, well, if it's not going to bug me when I'm 83 on my deathbed, well, I should just let it go now. So like, let it go from your mind. It's done. It's over. What will eat you alive will be the regrets of omission. And those are the things that we had thought about doing, wished we had done, but we didn't. So they're called paths not taken. This is like back to my example of my mom, all of the manuscripts she didn't send out, the business idea for the dog biscuit company she wanted to start making all natural dog treats. Like that would be like, oh, what could my life have been like if I was peddling dog treats on the street or in stores? And you do, and because this is what happens psychologically, we are wired to wonder about versions of our lives. And when we wonder about what would have happened if I did go back to school and finish that degree, or if I did take that big job, or what happens if I applied for that big job, or what happens if I did open my own studio for CrossFit, like what could my life have been like? I could have been happy, and all the things that we do. So we will kind of torture ourselves, even if we don't think we are, it's subconscious. So that's why I spend our time like, who cares what you did? Let's focus on these paths that are not taken, the coulda, shoulda, woulda is. And then even layering into that, there are regrets where categories. So Dan Pink does a lot of work talking about regrets, and there are different categories. So there are regrets that some of us have about connection. Like, I regret that I didn't maintain my relationships with my college friends, or I wish that I had stayed closer to my siblings, or I wish I made up with my dad before he died, right? So those are connection regrets, which usually reveals a deep desire for love. There are boldness regrets, which are about, man, I just like imagine this is you, like your narrative on your deathbed. I wish they just took more risks. Like I wish I put myself out there more. I wish I had tried, even if I would have failed. Because in fact, failure, of course, is a badge of like you showed up and you did it. High five to you. Wish I did that more, took more risks. And there are regrets about achievement and accomplishment. Like I wished that I had gone and trained for the marathon, or I wish that I had written the poetry book because it would have been really cool if I actually had this thing and it could have been part of my legacy, or I just would have felt really cool that I did it. And so sometimes those categories are helpful, I find, because it's all just part of this like, where am I? Because all we really care about is ourselves. Like, where do I fit? What do I? And can I like, was there a category there for you that you found resonant?
Yeah, there was. It was family, and I think I
Yeah.
consider myself to. I'm close with my family, but it's yet something where it's like, man, I wish I would spend more. There's not enough time that I would
Yeah.
spend with my family. Like I would spend. That's all, I think, and that's another question I had too, Jody. Is the goal to go to the end of your life without any regrets? Is that possible? Are we striving for zero, or is there going
Yeah.
to be a little bit of something or another there? Like no matter what, I'm gonna wish I
Yeah.
had spent more time with X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I don't think the idea is no regrets, even though hilariously the subtitle of my book is How to Make It to the End with No Regrets. We should put an asterisk on that. From now on, all new books will have an asterisk. Because again, we're gonna do dumb things. Like I'm gonna put my foot in my mouth and say something, and I would regret that. But again, like that's something different, or making choices in life, like oh, we moved to Portland and we wished we hadn't. Whatever. What I am looking for us to do here, just to be super clear, is like we're not going to stop making mistakes. That's not an option. What I want to be clear about is of the things that you want to do, you'll never have time to do all of them. And so it's our job to consistently, back to self-awareness, be prioritizing, wow, these are things I would love to do in the limited time I have left. And of these things, where am I feeling today about the stuff that I would regret the most if I didn't take action on? And maybe an example for you or others like you could be like, I wish that I had prioritized Friday afternoon lunches with my wife and daughter more. Did you say daughter? Did you say
Hmm.
daughter?
Hmm.
Okay, thank you. Made that up. Um, then going, full tilt and doing XYZ. And like maybe that's then like, well, now I have my action plan. Like that's my strategy. And now I'm going to act on it and make a date and say, hun, next Friday, you, me, kid, 12 p.m. But back to this list, like this is back to like bucket lists and especially achievement oriented people. I think some of our anxiety comes from the idea that we want to get a lot done. We want to travel to a lot of countries. We want to do so many cool things in our lives. And number one is like, well, there just won't be time for all of it. And we kind of intuitively know that, but that's just the act of prioritization and saying, okay, but what would you kick yourself the most for? And some of it has to do with actions and some of it has to do even with a way of being. So there are some people that I'll talk with who are like, no, you know what? I'm taking action on all the things that I want to do, and I will not have any coulda, shoulda, wouldas. I'll be great, good for you. But then when you scratch the surface a little bit, it's like, well, what are some other things? Would you, and I share examples of someone would say, I wish that I would be more present. Like maybe while I was with my family, maybe I put my phone down more and I just truly listened, or I wish that I had when we tell stories, and this is what's so effective. And I tried to make this happen in the book, and I want to do more of it. It's the stories about like when other people are gone. And you gave, a good example in the beginning when you talked about when you calculated your Mondays and you were like, I just thought about how many more holidays I have with my family. And this is the thing where, I think of a story someone told me recently where they were like, they were so annoyed with their husband. Every day he'd put his bagels on the counter and he'd have all the poppy seeds all over the counter. And they were so nagging and annoyed. Look at all these poppy seeds everywhere. I'm sure they said it in that voice. And then he died and early, or even if it wasn't early, it doesn't matter. And the thought was like, I just wish there were fucking poppy seeds on that counter. Like and so sometimes we have to do those mental gymnastics on purpose to say, what would back to regrets, would I regret if my grandmother died that I didn't go and sit with her and go through a photo book and talk about her early loves? That might be a thing where you go, oh yeah, I would. Or I wish that I had, spent more time just doing the simple stuff like Lego on the floor. And so those are these are twists and turns and ways we can just play games with our head on purpose to say, if you identify that that would be an epicenter of regret for you, great news. You could just course correct that today.
Yeah. I love that concept. I've been thinking about that a lot recently. So I have not today, a 6-month-old baby girl. And obviously there's a lot of late nights, and there's some struggle. There's some things that go with raising an infant. And the thought I've been having in my head lately, Jody, this is so cool that this is coming out because it's just been in my head recently, is that there's gonna be a day where I'm gonna wish for these days back. There's gonna be a day where I wish I could wake up at 3:30 in the morning, hold her, feed her, and put her back to sleep. And that in the moment, that helps me a lot because in the moment, I'm tired as heck. I ain't gonna lie. I don't want to be doing this. But I think about, man, there's gonna be a day, or I think about like, there's probably gonna be a day when she's a little bit older and she leaves lights on. It's like, man, just turn the lights off. Just simple things like that. There's gonna be a day where I want that light to be on in that room, and it's not going to be on because she's in college, whatever. So I think
Yeah.
that's a huge perspective shift of someday you're going
Yep.
to wish for these days to be
Yep.
back.
Thank you for beautifully depicting that. And you're bringing me back to this whole idea, and it's called temporal scarcity in psychological research, but also in economics, like this idea that when we clue into how the time of something is limited, it helps us see whatever that asset is as more valuable. So that's why I get us to count our Mondays, right? It's like, okay, it's a diminishing resource. Same thing like with your daughter when you go, how many more, like this happens a lot, like how many more summers do you have with your kid before they go to college and they never come back? Well, maybe they will come back. Apparently that's a thing. But anyway, or like back to this thing of, how many more. I think about my dad in Toronto. He just turned 87, and like he's literally living on borrowed time. He always says he's a gambler, and he's like, I'm playing with house money. He loves it. And like I'm aware that I'm in the like there every holiday I get or every visit I have where we go out for breakfast, which is our thing we do together, this could be the last omelet. Like, and by rights, by average, it should be. And so maybe while I'm there, I'm like gonna put my phone down. I'm addicted, like many of us, to my phone. And I'm like, what am I doing? This could be my last omelet with my dad. And I'm gonna put my phone down and I'm gonna be here. And what would make me feel proud right now to be the kind of daughter I want to be? So it really helps us. Is it a little bit morbid and unfortunate? Yeah, but I've learned, even though I study positive psychology, and I wish that we were just motivated alone by the pursuit of something good. Like I just want to, I take the initiative to be a good daughter, or you take the initiative to be a good dad. We need, unfortunately, the prod. We need the cattle prod. So let's start using it to our advantage.
We know from Robert Waldinger at Harvard, they did this study, this 85-year study. It's really popular now, that the biggest thing that helps make people happy is their social settings and their close relationships. And we talk about here on one of the regrets people have is taking their relationships for granted. So if you
Mm-hmm.
walk with me here on page 153, this was pretty cool. I haven't heard this before. Positive
Mm-hmm.
psychology talks about super social and equals super happy. So researchers
Mm-hmm.
compared very happy people to happy people, wondering what made them different. Of the very happy people, or the supranormal people in their sample, the striking thing was that they all had close relationships with others. I want supranormal happiness, don't you? Good relationships with others may be the single most important source of life satisfaction and emotional well-being across different ages and cultures. What a shame it would be then if we let these relationships flounder because we were swept up answering three,
Yeah.
four emails. Sometimes
Yeah.
this is common sense. I mean, we're not saying anything today that's like I've never heard this before, but they're great reminders. So walk me through
Yeah.
that happy versus very happy. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And the more that I read, and I'll be honest, sometimes we have confirmation bias. We seek out information just to back up what we already know to be true because it makes us feel better about ourselves. I am more of an introvert and a homebody. So I am not the person who's always looking for data to show that relationships equal happiness. I'm the person that's just very neutral about it. And I am so overwhelmed by the information that it is actually changing my decisions about how I spend my time because the evidence is so empirically avalanchy that when we have relationships with other people, we are we benefit in such a myriad of ways that we don't even have to fathom what they are, but we get more of a sense of support. It helps us with resilience. It helps us with laughter. It helps us with a sense of purpose and belonging. And at this point, I'm at the point now where I feel like it is, well, we could have an arm wrestling contest. Is it more important than exercise to have the social relationships or not? We could debate. We could have a whole episode where we debate this. Where this idea, like, okay, so one of the founders of positive psychology, so Martin Seligman at UPenn is one of the founders, and Chris Peterson, a colleague from his in Michigan. Chris Peterson has since died, rest in peace. But he was asked at one point to summarize what the essence of positive psychology is. First of all, the scientific study of well-being. He was asked to do it succinctly, and he said, "Other people matter." And then he said a few more words after that, where he said, "There may be no happy hermits." And even people who are more loners, or even people who are, more super independent, even as they work, the evidence is irrefutable. And so at this point, it needs to be almost a prescription. It needs to be something where and for me, I look at my calendar, and as much as back to the introvert point, my instinct is to just be home with the husband and the cat. I have to actively say, okay, like when I'm going to Chicago next, who am I going to see? I have to plan it. I have to make sure it happens, because otherwise I'll stay in, but I have to make it happen. And so for the rest of us, are we being really intentional about making sure there is time for any kind of interaction? As long as it's not a negative interaction, because some people will drain us and they obviously need to just be sent off to sea.
That's a great distinction there, because I think you and I are both similar there, where we have to go make it happen. I think some people are like, oh yeah, it sounds good. Again, we talk about awareness, strategy, and action. Awareness is one thing, write it down, but you got to go make this happen. So if it's important to you to invest in these relationships, and maybe I'm just talking out loud because maybe I'm talking to myself right now as I'm looking at the screen. Perhaps it's a great reminder for all of us. I like another part of this comment, or these regrets: closed doors versus open doors regrets. Some of the regrets are closed. There's nothing we can do about it. It's too late. Some of them are open. You say this quote that's just phenomenal: "Don't be an idiot. Walk through the damn open door, like right now." What's the difference between closed and open?
Yeah. Sometimes there's a coulda, shoulda, woulda, where you're like, it's a path not taken. Like, oh, it would have been so good if I told Mitzi, my first crush, that I loved her. And then you look her up and she's dead. And you're like, well, Mitzi will never know that I loved her, and I will never know that she loved me back. And that pontification of how my life could have been. All right, that's closed. That's done. So it's like, there ain't nothing you can do about that now, right? Like, I wished I had applied for that big job, and then you're still thinking about it, and you look and like, the job is filled. So done. An open door is the land we want to play in, which is like, and we get confused about this. So people are like entrenched in their career for, I've been in my job for 18 years and I've always wanted to go back to school to learn how to do graphic design. I'm like, yeah, you could do that. And they're like, oh, but no, they think it's a closed door. I'm like, it is technically open. You can organize your life. Will it be easy? No. But as we all know, satisfaction only comes from doing things that feel a little bit struggly and that take effort. So it's a recipe for win-win. Like, it is not a closed door. You can go back to school. It is not a closed door. You can still change your relationship if you need to, probably move your home. It is not a closed door, maybe to go and pick up the violin again if you used to play it. And even though, so that is, to me, some things, yeah, the ship has sailed. Too bad. But let's not spend time worrying about them, because that is, again, it is water under the bridge. Let's focus on the open doors of those regrets of omission.
And step through them, not later, but right now. I think one of the words you say in your book, the ones you hate most, is "I'll do it someday. I'll do it sometime." It's like that bugs you, doesn't it?
I feel such a visceral reaction. It's making me feel very uncomfortable right now. And so this idea about later. So here's where, even just time-wise, I know I don't want to date your podcast, but like September 6th is National Fight Procrastination Day. And I am like, this is our day to shine, guys. Like, I don't care about the stupid stuff. Well, I do. Like, you were all procrastinating stupid paperwork. I don't know, the pesky little things we have to get done. But I'm more interested in, like, we're procrastinating our lives. We do this thing where we have an idea about something we want to do. Oh, I want to start the business, right? Or I'm going to go and I'm going to book that cruise. But then we just sort of pocket it for later. And it could be like when work is less busy. Yeah, keep waiting for that day. Or retirement, which to me is like the cardinal sin of, like, are you asking to die inside now? Waiting to live later? Like, postponing our existence. I'm getting all out of breath here because I'm all worked up. Guys, not only might we not make it there, it's rare, we're probably going to make it to, to retirement, but many of us won't. But I'm even more concerned about, like, what about now? What about your next few years of life? Do you not want to have that speckled with life? Like, maybe book the cruise in it. If this year is crazy, well, what about next fall? Book it. Put a line in the sand, make that thing happen. Because later is a premise, not a promise, right? We may not get it, or we may wait till later and we are incapacitated, or we just miss the boat. And so I feel very, very protective of the life we're living now, that it deserves to be lived, not put on ice for a life that's going to be so juicy and amazing later.
I love that. I have one more question, and I think it's a very important one. You talk about the power of being brushed by death. And so some
Yeah.
people, they've been near death, they've seen death, etc. I
Yeah.
also talk about, or I think about when I read this phenomenal book. By the way, You Only Die Once, How to Make It to the End with No Regrets. If you've gone with us this far, get this book. It's phenomenal. When I read this book, I get this feeling
Mm.
of it's a great feeling. Hey, let's go do the thing. Stop hesitating. So if you're brushed by death, you get that feeling. If you read this book, you get that feeling. It's a good feeling, but it's just a feeling. My question for you is how can my
Mhm.
listeners make that feeling last a longer? So I finish this book, it's great.
Yep.
In a week or two from now, that feeling is going to disintegrate a little bit. So
Yes.
how can I keep this feeling with me
Yeah.
forever?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to reread the book every month for the rest of your life. No, that is the question. And that is where I am the good example, because I'm like, I'm the poster child. I'm writing about it, talking about it, quite frankly, like, screaming about it. And I need to be reminded to live. And the way I do that is I make sure I have my Monday countdown timer. It's like every Monday, I'm making sure I've got 1812, 1811 next week if I make it, knock on wood. And I've got all the little reminders. I'm a fan of having, well, I got the tattoo of a skull in the hourglass. You don't have to get a tattoo of that. But here I am all decked out. I've got the skull ring, like reminders around you, or make it a conversation that you have with your friends, for example, to say, hey, when we get together for, dinner once a month, let's update each other on what we're doing with our bucket list, or let's have a kind of a funny conversation about, would you recommend your life? Or let's have a conversation about what's one regret you want to change between now and the next time we meet. Like, have that be part of your social dialogue. Associate different things with death. I know it doesn't sound appetizing, but kind of never look at, your watch the same again. It's the countdown timer. Look at your bouquet of flowers. And every time those flowers are going to die. They're beautiful today. And then they're going to be a great memory, fleeting. But you'll let that be the subtle little memento mori reminders. It is not a one and done. And so back to like the brushes with death, one of the things I do is because I'm fascinated by the clarity with which people who have faced an almost end, they're living with way more purpose and intention than we could ever, quite frankly, hope to be. And so I don't want to have a near-death experience, ideally. If I could have a safe one, I would totally sign up for that, but that sounds a bit risky. So I put myself in their shoes and I say, well, what if I just came home from the hospital today? Maybe after being in an accident where, oh man, she shouldn't have lived. It's a miracle. And I come home and I'm like, it helps me size like what matters. It helps me look at all my to-dos and go, yeah, that's stupid. I'm doing that because I'm trying to please. I don't need to do that. Now that I'm so lucky to be alive, I now know that that's the priority and what I'm going to focus on today. And so I think that journal prompts, I'm a big fan of blocking off in your calendar, regular personal retreats, even if it is just a date with yourself for lunch, or a coffee date, or if it has to just be your quick snippet of time in the garage. But making time for yourself, blocking it off. Because if you already hinted at it, and we're of the same mind. Good intentions. The path to the grave are paved with them. It's more than just hell. It's to our grave, and then God knows where we go. But we have to plan the time. So I want to plan the time to plan my time. Like, I'm literally, I've got next Friday off. No one, don't you even dare try and suggest you're going to get on my calendar. Now I'm taking the whole day. That's elaborate, and I don't usually do that. But oftentimes I'll just take like even an hour. and I block it off, and it's special and it's precious. And I always make sure, as like a nice ritual, I make it special, like with a special drink or with a special outing or wherever I am. But I want to be like, this is the life I get to live. How's it going? How do I want to shape it? And where are the things I need to say no to? What do I need to eliminate? And what do I really want to focus on? What would make me feel proud? And then what am I? And I have to bust myself. What, because my boldness, regrets are my thing. What am I afraid to do that I need to add to my anti-chicken shit list? Because I have one of those. And what thing am I going to do today so that I close out this week? I love closing out a Friday on a high where I'm like, I get to just go on my walk with my husband who wants the walk. I'm going to go on my walk and be like, I've got a spring in my step because I sent out that scary email to that prospect that I was really hoping to, do a keynote for. And I'm so proud I did it. And they may never email me back, but I still feel great.
Awesome. Jody, you are funny. You are a fresh breath of fresh air, and you have so much insight and wisdom. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate the time today. If my listeners want to follow you, get the book, and get on the journey with you of You Only Die Once, where can I send them? The floor is yours.
Oh, I love that you even asked. Thank you. It's generous. I'm over at 4000mondays.com. And the book is there. There's a Monday morning calculator if you're not in the mood to do the math. But yeah, 4000mondays.com and on Instagram. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Jody. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you. You're amazing.